All right, so welcome to session three of the Night Science Book Club on the Knowledge Machine. Thanks for joining us. Maybe a few more people will come in. But today we're going to focus on sort of the end of the second of part two and the beginning of part three of the book. So we're going to talk about the chapters, the drive for objectivity, the supremacy of observation, science's strategic irrationality, and the war against beauty. And this really encapsulates a deepening of the iron rule as a concept, which is what we talked about in the second session, which is really at the heart of the book. So just to recap that, that is really the core notion in this book by Michael Strevens. He basically says that the iron rule means that only empirical observation matters in the selection of scientific theories. Every other consideration should be left aside. And as this section of the book that we're talking about today kind of focuses on or highlights, is this is a deeply irrational sort of thing to be doing. It's very powerful, Strevens argues, but it's also irrational because it sets aside a whole deep aspect of human cognition. So I wonder, thoughts on this part. What did you observe? What are your reactions to what Strevens puts forward in this section of the book?
Yeah, maybe to start out. So I read the first two chapters a bit ago. So I think there he one thing he notices is that there seems to be a contradiction, and I think he spends an entire chapter explaining that it's in fact not a contradiction between facts are the only thing that matter to very like bluntly put this iron rule. The facts of observation is the only thing that matters. However, we can only observe through sort of the subjective self, and that seems to be a contradiction. I think is what he says, and then I think he goes a very long way around to say that that is in fact not a contradiction. And I thought it was a bit strange. It felt a bit like shoehorning the this iron rule concept of his to this point that that he made himself, which I didn't think that was too strong. But yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, right at the
was not
beginning of the
convinced.
book, right, he focuses on the frailty of the scientist, is what he describes, which is where he points to the fact that we're all subject to our belief systems and our biases and all the baggage that we have, which can be a strength, but it can also be a limitation. And he sort of questions almost, are are humans actually capable of the sort of, you know, Popper style falsification, right? Are we even, especially if we're like invested in stuff, right? Do we not just hang on to things that we're emotionally attached to, that we spent 20 years studying and publishing on? And, I mean, we're kind of, yeah. So I agree with you that that is a big challenge to this. So I wonder, Sweer, if you think about this at the action of an individual scientist and the action of the scientific community, whether that feels different or not.
It does, to an extent. I want to believe as well that indeed, so over the average, on the average of the community, this averages out towards, converges towards the truth. And I think in the long term it will, and it does. Um, but I think an interesting point there is that I think especially nowadays with, everything being very, very connected, that might not necessarily be the case. I think especially the more computational side that I'm in, you can have a couple of very large names that have a specific view on things, right? That might be rooted in a subjective observation of objective facts. That get amplified very hard, and then that is sort of the creates sort of this leading paradigm, and then it's very hard to go against that and be able to yeah, challenge that in a meaningful way. Um, in long term, you're at that's still possible, but it's an inefficiency, I would say there. I think in the
Yeah.
modern
Yeah, the
scientific community.
orthodoxy and the sort of the sense of scientific revolution, right? Thomas Kuhn's idea that things we stick with a paradigm for a long time, an orthodoxy, then it gets overturned, and then we have a new one very quickly.
Is
I
Thomas Kuhn the same that does anything goes, or is that someone else? I forgot.
I think that's someone
Thomas
else.
Mons.
Okay, I
I
was
forgot
just
his name. Yeah,
oh, Paul Fairbrand. That's who I was maybe thinking of.
yeah,
But
I think so.
sorry,
Yeah,
what was your original question again about? Sorry, you were answering a question about beauty, like right, like and what
I was
we
just asking
ignore.
for your responses to what you read. What this part of the book is about. That's all.
Yeah, and I think that community level, right, is important to touch on too, right? Because who determines what's empirical and what isn't empirical data? At some point, you can quantify anything. And then the other part is an arithmetic part that is like, okay, -1, -2, right? You can add or subtract different, sorry, this is a little abstract, but like different aspects of quantification or different aspects of minutia. But the moment that you try to apply that at a broader level, at a broader trophic level, that that minor shift in what we consider to be empirically statistically correct or like empirically different is going to not exponentially necessarily, but we don't really know how that plays out across time. And the only way that you can predict that, right, is, and the value of it is whether or not right now, right, we have to evaluate whether or not that's actually serving and aligning with reality.
Yeah,
And
I
maybe
mean, I
that's
think.
something that's beautiful. I don't know.
Yeah, I think. I mean, science is always sort of the current best, right? The provisional best, and then it gets refined and maybe overthrown, right? So for sure, for sure. Yes, I wonder, one of the ideas that he brings out here, which is sort of almost counterintuitive, is this idea that it is the iron rule that is actually makes it easier to overthrow an orthodoxy, right? And I think the point he makes that if an orthodoxy had cultural dimension or even religious dimension or aesthetic dimensions or anything like that, it would be very, very hard to overthrow because any attempt to overthrow it could be framed in those contexts, right? Why, looking at, Galileo, for example, right? While the awkwardness of empirical observations, as inconvenient they could be, particularly to the powerful people in the field, nevertheless, over time, I mean, does that make sense to you? Is that,
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've I think we've come a long way since since Galileo in how we do this the scientific inquiry for sure. And maybe it's too negative to say like, oh well, it's still there still is an orthodoxy and it's still there, but yeah, compared to what it used to be, it's much more objective, I guess, in that sense, so much better. Yeah, much more higher quality.
you know,
Um,
Can I
but
add to that?
I still think that whoever has the loudest microphone on the internet at the moment has might have a higher reach on what is seen as the truth compared to the one who has the most objective observations.
And I think also not just that, but like it's not just names and it's not just that, but you can have fun with it. I guess there are ways you can use that kind of iron rule to use words, but that requires intensive language comprehension and being able to write in such a way that your readers could beat you there and know that what's left out of that methods part, what's left out of the discussion, you need to know the entire field and all of those big names. And I've had this with many mentees where I'm like, you're right. It is this it is this egregious. But how you get around this is you cannot say it's egregious. You have to say that you have to use empirical evidence, even if it seems, and find a way to tie that in. And I think the labor of that, it depends on the system, right? Like if the labor of that will never reach the inflection point of what Kuhn suggests is possible without, I mean, people, every day that goes by, and people lose trust with reality, like, right? If I tell you one thing as a scientist and I exert my authority on it, and you look at another thing like beauty, let's take the Platonic form of beauty. I tell you what beauty is and what it's not. That's the whole issue with AI, right? Like it's confidence level. If we all have this high confidence and I'm an expert and I'm telling you someone who doesn't know these empirical categorizations, like I just don't understand how as scientists we're going to survive as a authoritative voice on it then. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, tell me a little bit more. It sounds interesting. I'm not sure I fully grasp what you're saying.
So I guess what I'm saying is if there's this orthodoxy, like, so I determine what's correct or not correct, you
You're
know,
the authority in the field.
exactly. And authority means something specific. It's not that they're right, they're the authority and they dictate what's right and wrong by choosing, right? Like by telling others this is what is correct, this is what is not correct. But if that person is biased in any way or partial in any way, right, or that group of people are in this way, then that leads to information aggregation as truth or not truth and lack of questions. Because now the higher that you've ranked yourself as authoritative, and the more that you say that this is true, the more you lead people to share less, give less ideas, give I don't know if linguists are around or listening, but like if you have semantics, that's how many words you can use, right? That's how many ways you can express. You're reducing your semantics that you have available to you to use, right? And that has these downstream consequences. I guess I'm trying to get at here is it literally handicaps scientists' ability to be able to actually explore all of the factors involved. And I know it's not exactly what you're asking, but that's kind of where I get into the weeds with this, where I feel as though you just can't. I'm sorry, I feel awful because there's such big ideas, but like at the end of the day, if there's someone saying dogmatic things, the orthodoxy quickly leads to dogma if unchecked, I think, then what are we studying, right? We get close on this microcosm level, but it's a community microcosm in a set of time, right? And I don't know how you break that. I have no fundamental understanding of that part. So I don't think I answered your question at all, but I do think I just kind of stated my confusion.
No, it's an interesting thing. So I guess that makes me wonder, why do we need authorities? I mean, why do we have them? Is that just a natural behavior pattern for humans?
Yeah,
I think
that-
so.
yeah.
No, you go.
Okay, sure. Yeah. No, I think it makes sense, especially um, I think there's a couple biases, right? I think especially people who do, have done great work in the past or have made like good breakthroughs in the past. You sort of expect them to, within their field, say smart things in the future as well, right? I think that is definitely something that is, especially if you look now in the AI field, there's, it matters almost as much who is saying something rather than what they are exactly saying. On this whole debate on scaling laws and can we just keep adding more compute or do we actually need something else? I think that's like one of the big discussions at the moment, and it's really yeah, and that so I think that is one of the things, and then I think from more of a layman perspective, I think at some point you just want someone to explain in reasonable ways what's going on with the world. And then I think someone if someone sounds like he knows what he's talking about, I think that's very natural to want to believe someone's like, okay, well, this person has looked into this a long time. Like it's the kind of the whole advantage of specialization, on a knowledge level. It's like, okay, this person is specialized into learning everything there is to know on this specific part of biology. Tell me about it, and I will believe you because you've spent much more time on it than I have. I think that's a very natural
Yeah.
thing to do.
Though I would put it to you that in the general sort of public sphere, we're terrible at actually understanding who has the knowledge
Yeah,
that should make them an authority, right? I mean, I don't want to name any specific examples, but certainly in the US, we are in a, I will name an example, right? We have a HHS secretary who's clearly unqualified, and doesn't have any of the signifiers of the knowledge that you were just talking about, right? The sort of, and yet that seems in itself, or actually a positive signifier culturally at the moment, right? As sort of the anti-scientist, right? The common sense. I think we have this natural thirst that, common sense should be good enough. And the problem that, what science really teaches you is that common sense is actually not that helpful, right? In many circumstances. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So I guess in that sense, the iron rule is a potential strength because it has the power to overthrow orthodoxies and cast down the authorities, only to build others up, almost immediately in their place, right?
Well, I have a question though. Like, do you think that that's really like true necessarily? Because I feel like that's in the lab being able to kind of, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought here, but there is some moments I think where there's acceptable points where you're like, I am not an expert. I mean, like when you're really working on these things, I'm looking at a picture that I had found a long time ago where it's an elephant. And it's like this old tale where like people see different parts of the elephant and they're like, it's a spear, it's a snake, it's a tree. And like those authoritative figures, like, yes, they give you the ability to scale off of it and argue with it, right? It just depends on how authoritative they are. Like an MD in the context of confidence in diagnostics, they can, it's not, I'm not, there's no bias and I'm not saying there's fault. It's like there's limitations to what they are able to observe in a 15-minute time period, right? So I would almost argue that there is no, it's almost weird to me that there are these specific people that could say correct or incorrect, like that in one domain. Like if you're going to say, I am an expert in this, and now I've become the expert in my field of biology, which is very niche, in order to be an expert, then suddenly you're basically going to be looking at an elephant saying the tail, it's a rope. And people unalign that when they're like, well, I'm looking over here and it's an elephant because I'm standing 30 feet away, right?
Mhm.
So if that's the expert and he's yelling at me, it's a rope, or she or them, I'm gonna say it's not. And then that's, I don't trust scientists anymore. It seems more mystical.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've
Yeah.
put your finger. Oh, go ahead, Sweer.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think there's a delicate balance there to walk, like especially. So I think there's so first of all, this is mostly in communicating with non-experts, right? I think within the field, none of this matters, or that
Yes.
everyone should be
Yeah.
looking at the elephant, and should be knowing that it's you look only at a part of the elephant. Um, but so I think that this is sort of what we started on, right, with the whole science communication thing, leads to a very delicate balance in how you should communicate that. Um, and that's what makes it really hard, I think, because ideally what you would say is like, well, it's a rope because it's made out of rope, or because we can hang on to it, and it's like ideally you can explain what's going on, your train of thought. Um, maybe even boil it down back to common sense, even though it's a tricky thing uh, to use that for sure. But I think if something doesn't align with common sense, I think that is a red flag for many people that try to understand whatever anyone claiming to be an expert is. And that is indeed something that would cause mistrust. So that's why it's just really hard, I think.
Yeah. And I think you said something that's weird that was interesting to me. You said in the field it shouldn't be a problem, right? And I would say that what would characterize the field would be a sense of humility, right? So true knowledge seekers, true scientists tend to be humbled pretty quickly during their, the early part of their career, and they very quickly, and it's the classic Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but that, it's the people who think they know more than they know that are the dangerous people. And as a scientist, you repeatedly learn what you don't know, and so you have to keep coming back to with humility to you recognize that you don't know, and therefore your mind can be open to new ideas and new interpretations, right? It's if you're it's what you don't know that will get you, right? What you don't know. So I want to do a slight pivot. I want to talk about chapter 10, the war against beauty. So, and I want to bring that in a little bit to the night science thing. So throughout this section of the book that we're talking about, Strevens is very careful to separate the public and the private sphere, right? And we talked a little bit about that last time, in that he I think ascribes the strict application of the iron rule as public science, by which he doesn't mean necessarily talking to the general public, but public science in the sense of papers and presentations and things like that. While in private, in the privacy of our own minds, he recognizes that scientists are actually full of biases and mental models and stuff like that, which can be both bad and good. And in that context, I guess I would say night science is a realm where beauty could be important.
And that kind of comes back, I think, to you saying, like, is it against common sense within the lab, like within the niche? That's where almost like discovery happens, right? Like, it's that moment where, like, this is not the common sense within the context of the lab. Like, this result does not fit my common sense expectation. That's kind of, I don't know about you guys, but that feels pretty beautiful to me at night science. I mean, I'm thinking about literally being in the lab at night. And I know that's kind of breaking some rules, of things, but where you do all of your extra experiments because there's some extra whatever that you have lying around and it gives you something non-common sense and you're like, why? And then it's beautiful when that goes back into day science and you test it for real or for with rigor required for day science, right? And if that makes common sense, then suddenly within the context of maybe a larger idea, that's really cool. I think that's beautiful, but I don't know why. I couldn't tell you why.
I mean, beauty is somewhat intuitive. It's not always um, suitable for intellectual dissection,
Hmm.
perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it indeed, is that this intuitiveness of beauty in these systems is what makes it very appealing in a way, and um, I think helps in trying to understand why something is the way that it is, right? I think the example that he gives earlier in the book of like quantum mechanics, where he said, I think at some point he says like, yeah, nobody is, or that quantum scientists have given up on trying to understand quantum mechanics, right? And so I think that's a still like a great example where for following this iron rule and to get closer to truth, it's important to do that. But then, indeed, when you, yeah, basically already repeating what you said, if you want to understand it, I think beauty gives like a good framework to do it. If there's like looking for symmetries, looking for ways to distill something into a simpler form because it's easier to sort of have this as sort of like a base level knowledge and then build off of that. Then when all the equations that you have to keep in mind are immense things, let's say.
Yeah, so as creative scientists who lean into these forbidden fruits, I'll call them, in our night science moments, right?
Mhm.
But then sort of when we return back to the day science, sort of, I mean, let me ask, are we effective at leaving them behind? Are we truly, or are they still there influencing even our day science activities, right? Our experimental design, our data interpretation, our presentations.
I would say, yeah. Like, I would say that like shapes everything that I have experimentally designed ever. Like, if I ever have like a novel experience outside of science or even during my days, I would almost say my night science carries over just because it's such a hobby into like friendships or, other things with people who aren't scientists. And as a well, technically my degree's in pathobiology. I like that because it was broad. I could just study disease and what's not disease. And that gives me some authority if we want to talk about authority in that regard. But like in the sense of describing, like, when I run into someone who has cancer, I'll ask them, what's your life like? That, of course, that influence, I can't think of a better source to get my data ideas from that would shape my work. So I guess it just depends on what your night science consists of or looks like or what the functionality of it is or what your motivations are. But I can't imagine that not sticking with you, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm sure some cognitive scientist out there might want to say something about how that is true or argue about it at least.
Yeah. I think so. I think it should almost stick with you, right? Is what you were saying. I think it's really hard to come up with new and creative ideas without, thinking in these lines, up to the point of observation, if that makes any sense. So I've had this experience as well where there's, you work at something for a while and you think like, there's this one thing And I think that nobody's talking about it, but in my mind, it just doesn't make any sense that it's not that it's not there, that there's not just a certain way to sort of break the system. Um, and nobody has tried to doing this before, and it doesn't make sense to me. Like it has to be possible to do it this way, right? And then you set up a couple experiments, and all of them fail. All of them still nothing breaks the way that I wanted to break. I mean, after a while, yes, you have to like throw your hands in the air and be like, well, I guess I was wrong. It's still not according to my intuition, which is in a way guided by, I think also an
Yeah.
ideal of beauty. Um,
Hmm.
but it's just not there. So yeah, then I was wrong.
So how does this play out in the times that we live in where we are just overwhelmed by information, right? Um, so you were saying, intuition, that made me think that, what is the purpose of human intuition, right? What is one way of thinking about it is the accumulation of experiences and knowledge over time that leads to sort of a mental model, or a refinement of existing mental models, right? So if you've by the time you're my age, you've read hundreds and hundreds of scientific papers, but you can't remember, at least if you have a normal memory like me, you can't remember the vast majority of them in any kind of detail. Maybe a handful stick out because they were so influential on your work or whatever. But I'd like to think that the rest of them have sort of created a sediment of intuition, perhaps. Is that convincing? Is that a reason to bring intuition into your day science?
I'm curious about what you mean by intuition here, because like that's something that I've always wondered. And speaking of breaking models and stuff like that, right? A lot of that, when I am able to break a model and understand why, like it's usually a one sentence under explanation of why it didn't work or like what the right answer is. I have
Yeah.
to break that down intuitively to go step by step. Something that might come out in one sentence because I've worked with people who have like a rare disease and did some analysis. I have a one sentence answer why you shouldn't give them X, Y, or Z drug. Why do I know that? I don't know. It took me an hour to like work backwards because I just was fundamentally curious about if I'm just coming out of nowhere with this factoid that I read somewhere, or how do I know this? And it was like 15 logical steps. That was kind of nuts to me because I was like, I didn't know that I had been making these leaps. They're not really leaps. They're like, I almost be giving them packages of code that I have made zipped and now I'm adding it all in. But to break that, I have to unzip every file to know how I got there. So that's just
Yeah.
my like own metaphor, but I would be curious to know what you guys feel about intuition.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of leaning on the ideas of Kahneman, right? Thinking fast and thinking slow, right? So he distinguishes between thinking fast, which is sort of immediately, and what's his name calls it Blink. I can't remember the guy's name now. Begins with a G. Another popular science author. He wrote a book called Blink, which sort of says, you can, he talks about how people who are expert in something can look at a complex data set or a complex situation and make an intuitive interpretation of it, right? Which is Kahneman's fast thinking model, which is kind of, if you want to go back to evolution, is sort of what keeps us alive in complex, dangerous situations, right? And then Kahneman talks about thinking slow, which is sort of more academic and, deliberative and so on. So that's what I was thinking about. That's what I meant when I was saying intuition.
Interesting. And that's why Malcolm Gladwell, I think I just
Thank you.
Googled
Yes.
just to
G.
double
See, I got the
check.
G, but I couldn't get past the G.
GM. Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's interesting because I do think that there's also intuition in the slow part there, right? Because the fast part is definitely that's like the just pattern recognition based on repetitive training, what you've done before. But I think why some people can come up with ideas that others cannot is also I think based off of what you were saying earlier, the sediment of the things that you have read and the knowledge that you have acquired, which definitely I think seeps into this the slow part as well.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to say really quickly, like thinking about the chapters, I think that intuition can sort of be a complex construction of like a lot of areas that it's like almost like a search engine that's happening subconsciously where like induction reasoning is just subconsciously applied, and like if you are able to understand that that's subconscious versus conscious, if you're able to be aware of that, then I think you can operate night science into day science or integrate it better and be able to
Hmm.
come out the other end and have a product that you can potentially, live off in the day so you
You
can
can
still do your night.
you can stay safe. You won't get too carried away by the night science events. I think that's really important. I think an inner sort of editor, an inner critical voice is really important. Also, in terms of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and we were talking about experts earlier, right? And one of the things that I've observed, I'm sure you have too, to my endless frustration and annoyance, is that when someone is expert in one thing, they suddenly are asked to be expert in things that they have zero clue about. But because, they're, it's particularly on TV, you see this kind of thing, right? Where they drag people in who know, who suddenly are experts on everything. And that's just lazy and annoying. But some of the worst practitioners of that are not humble enough to say, well, actually, I don't know anything about this field, so I'm not going to say anything. They're like, let's jump in and say something.
Yeah, I think a great term on this that I heard thrown around a while ago is expert creep, where indeed someone starts out as like, oh yeah, this guy's great because he's a clear communicator on this one thing that he's an expert about. Indeed, yeah, let's ask everything that's even like remotely adjacent to it, and then yeah, it's hard,
Yeah.
I guess, in that position to say, well, actually, I don't
Yeah.
know.
And it's annoying when they're just there, but it's actually dangerous when they start running large countries.
Yes,
True.
and I
Yeah.
think that's why we need to find the mathematicians. Where are they? Like, where is ASM group? I need to talk to them because it's like one of the few fields where I can feel at peace with what they're saying because I can look at it and there is no opportunity to be put in a position where you have expertise where you don't, like in mathematics specifically, because there is no, I don't know, there's no way to kind of goof that. I don't know how else to say that, fudge it. And when you do fudge it, you kind of say like, well, that's where I'm at. And I love that about math, where it's like, yeah, this is the limit. This is actually the study of what it is. And so I don't know. I think that's why I think if we can incorporate those ideas back into like culture or at leleast science people, so they might actually find it easier to communicate with others. Because when you think about math, and I've had this as I've been learning more of it, because I used to think I was terrible at it because I'm bad at arithmetic, but I now understand there's so many subdomains, and half the time it's just arbitrary writing of symbols that I told you what they meant beforehand. And that helps communicate like that scalability of communication goes so far, right? So I know that's not exactly what you're getting at, but like, is the title of somebody important when we're dictating what functionally is expertise and day science, or is it more of this idea of like I want to say quorum sensing idea of like what is acceptable as quantifiable across fields and who gets to be in that quorum? I don't fundamentally know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the romantic version of science, the emperor has no clothes, right? The youngest child may point to a truth and turn over the orthodoxies that we are talking about. That's certainly I think, a romantic notion of science. I'm not sure that science actually works that way, or ever has, because once you get to the top, you're pretty keen on staying there, even if you have long passed your prime in terms of creativity and things like that. But I want to ask though something slightly different. I wonder if in again in this time what your thoughts are about AI in this context, right? So some of the things we've talked about, like intuition being the summation of large amounts of information that you have maybe ingested over many years, right? So one thing AI, as limited as it is today, is capable of is assimilating a lot of information. So is talking to a large language model that has ingested PubMed, is that the same as having intuition?
For the machine or
Mm,
like for the person?
For you as a person. So if
Oh,
you
okay.
instead, I'm not going to read that PubMed stuff. I'm just going to ask this AI, and then I still get the same. I can still arrive at the same destination because
Can I answer first? Because I think that Sarah might have a better answer than I do, like technically, but like, or like in a way that makes sense. But I just work with students, right, who use AI, all they're high schoolers. I
yeah,
mentor them and on science projects. I'm okay with AI. I don't mind, like for me, I don't use it really at all for my science stuff because I've noticed it curves to me, and I don't like that because I'm not trying to get that just for me because then I realize it's taking me down a path that's not my own. But I've noticed with students, it's to the point where it's like you're missing the sensory experiences that are required for that interaction between two different ideas and fields. If you want to empathize with the field or a feeling, for example, I have to have had that feeling in some capacity. If I'm asking for intuition, that's a big question about like, well, what is in like how does one form intuition and what context is it used for? So these students can use ChatGPT all day and it's very curved to what they are studying. And so they can ask a question like, what does X mean? And it'll return all these protein like answers. And the question could be, what does folding mean? And I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly now no longer really intuition. You're building intuition, but for a model that is returning that intuition with information back to you with no iterative selection process on your end. And that's something I also wanted to say. Like, if we're thinking about selection as an evolutionary, someone who did study evolutionary biology, I think we forget how much artificial selection is still going on, even behaviorally, and how that has an impact on selection biologically. So, like, it is artificial selection to select what is correct in day science and what is incorrect in day science, right? To some,
that's
I'm
the
just going to
iron rule
argue
in
it.
action.
I'm going to argue that.
But is
But
that bad? Are you saying that's bad?
it depends. I would argue it's bad if it's left up to any single individual looking at that part of an elephant. That's
Right.
all I'm gonna say. I don't really know how else to say that because as someone who's younger in science,
No,
I
I would
can
agree with you.
I
I mean,
can
that's
feel like that's the case sometimes.
hence the field, right? The sort of the field notion of the field corrects itself, not necessarily the individual. And this whole notion which Strevens writes about, which I love. I love this metaphor of the coral reef, right? I just think that's so amazing, right? So we're all polyps shedding a little bit of calcium carbonate, which are basically the results sections and method sections of our papers, and then we expire, and the sort of introduction discussion decays, and the only thing that's left are the figures, right? And then maybe sometime in the future, which is, by the way, I think this is a complete tangent. And I want to hear from Sweer on this previous question, but I think we should train AI to look at nothing but the results part of papers and ignore all the rest, but which is hard for AI because the rest is full of juicy language, which is what LLMs love. And the results section is like all these graphs and figures and tables, which they don't really love. So anyway, Sweer, please.
yeah, so I think Jackie already made a very good point there on that when you get very specific. So I think research articles are already quite specific in that sense. It's hard to build an intuition or to consider, that an intuition because it is because of it depends a lot on the way it is prompted, and it's a very stochastic system in
Mhm.
that sense, right? So that is the so if you would say like what's the difference between a human that has read all of the papers on this specific field and having fed all those papers into an LLM and having that give us like what would be the difference between those two summaries, and would there be a difference between how you judge those? Um, my main issue is that I think if you ask the human the same question 5 different days, you will probably get a slightly different answer, but it will probably surmount to the same thing. And I am not so sure with the LLM. That's my main concern there. That that sort of makes it where I trust the sort of LLM intuition for if you want to call it that. Um, what was the other point I was going to make? I don't remember. But then that's the And oh yeah, so and I think when things get very specific, um, it's harder as well because the amount of data that's on it is just it becomes much less. And indeed, so the point that Jackie already made as well, where like the way that you frame the question is also very much leading into how you or what data that you get back. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. All right. So what would it look like to make there's lots of work going on with AI, right? There's the Google co-scientist, and I don't know if you saw, but Anthropic, released Claude for Life Sciences recently with all kinds of exciting tools, right? It can read PubMed, it can look at all kinds of databases and so on. So clearly this stuff is coming, right? And people like us are not probably going to get a say in anything that is designed. We just have to live with it. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Then, just to wrap up, in terms of what we're learning from Strevens about the iron rule, how does the AI connect to the iron rule? Does it matter? Is the AI just night science and we don't care? At what point does it need to think about the iron rule? We need to take it into consideration. And I don't mean think in the active sense.
um, so yeah, so I guess one other thing to mention, sort of combined with also with the previous question, I think is that there are cases where there's something that you want to know or need to know, and it's outside of your field, but it might be very common sense or common knowledge in a different field, right? A colleague of mine told me an example of this a couple of weeks ago, where he was like, I don't know how to figure this out, and then he asked this to ChatGPT, I think, and it gave him a suggestion about a method that he had never even heard of, let alone
Yes.
consider. And then turns out this method is very common or popular in like a adjacent field or whatever. And then it worked really well in his case. So in that sense, it can be very, very valuable in general, AI. So figuring out things that are known but unknown to the individual. Um, and I think so. Going back to what you just asked, I think that um, things like such a AI scientists could be seen, the output of that could be seen as an experiment in itself.
Yes. Yes.
I think that is the sort of the lens that makes the most sense. So then it is okay. Now we have to observe this experiment and interpret it in the way that it is. So that the fact that it's set up, start to finish by one of these AI models, which I also don't think is very straightforward. But yeah, it requires a lot of critical thinking.
Can
Yeah,
I comment
interesting.
super quickly on that? Because I've done
Please.
this with a student where she sent me the same question. We typed in the same exact question on ChatGPT, completely different answers. And I was like, this is an experiment in itself that you can write down in your lab notebook. And she just really didn't, I don't think it really got through to her. And that tells me something about intuition that's super important there. Like she still uses it in the same way. And I'm still like, she's like, I'm just talking to myself too much. And I'm like, literally, yes. On like a weird, with literal level, yes. And I'm so sorry. But like, if you can see it side by side and still not iterate after that, then there's a fundamental lack of individual intuition. I guess I had like a final comment, which is more like that there's like this difference because humans carries intuitions that are learned. We've evolved to have intuition learned because like it's specifically naturally selected, right? That our intuitions relying on it and Sophia kind of talked about this already, but like a communal level where he was talking about use cases for different methods, and we can think about stats, right? A lot of people use stats. A lot of people cannot explain why they use a specific modifier on that stat, and sometimes that actually exponentially like makes their data either significant or insignificant. But the point being is that like on a personal and communal level, that's with sensory experience. Like you're denying the whole neuroscience, like you're denying the whole aspect of biology that is involved in learning. And so when we think about the LLM's intuition, it's contained to when the model's accessed and not with humans around, right? So there is none of this error correction that you might have seen with your colleagues, right? Where you're like, oh shoot, that's the wrong thing, or like maybe I can send this to another colleague who's using this thing in the wrong way. But that requires this intersection, this interstep that doesn't exist currently, I think, in using LLMs. And that's kind of like that other idea where the LLM will like usually probably never make an unprompted insight moment of insight. I'm just typically speaking due to requiring a prompt for an output. There's no, I forget what the thing is where the dude sits in the bathtub and then he has a realization because he sinks or floats, you know, like that concept.
Archimedes, yeah.
Yeah, Archimedes. I forgot the name too, just like Malcolm Gladwell. But humans can give in completely unprompted output. And typically those are the ones that are difficult to understand on an intuitive level. Like I was thinking the Monty Hall problem. But then once you understand it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like the three-door problem where you say yes to one door, or if they say like, no, it's not behind this door, it's behind one of the other two doors, then you should change the door that you picked. That's super unintuitive. But when you get it, it's usually because other humans around you are helping you understand this with metaphor, with bringing in other concepts, bringing in other ideas. Have you seen that TV show? Maybe you don't need to see it to understand it, to understand a very fundamental mathematical or statistical, I guess statistical rather, intuition there, or statistical reality and intuition.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of a revolution in science that's going to probably alter the way we do it in the next few years, I imagine. Whether it'll be for the better or the worse, I don't know. I used to be a techno optimist, but now I'm no longer
I
quite
was
so
too.
optimistic.
I'm still
But
optimistic,
okay, good. Well,
hopefully.
that's good. I'm old and you're not, so that's good. We need the
Fear, how do
people.
you feel?
I don't know. I wouldn't describe myself as a techno optimist nor pessimist. I think there's reason to be both at the moment, which is why it's a mixed feeling. I'm a techno mixed feeling kind of person.
Ambivalence, maybe.
Techno ambivalence. Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts and sharing them. And I do think this is a really interesting discussion. I appreciate having had it with you. And in our next session, we're going to wrap up the knowledge machine. We're going to talk about the future of the machine. Maybe some of the things we touched on there will be we can revisit when we talk about that. But what is the care and maintenance of the knowledge machine? Strevens is very interested in that, and I think that means he thinks it will persist, which I kind of think as well. I think even under AI, it must persist because the reality is reality, right? We must bend to its cruel whims. With that note, I thank you both for participating, and see you soon.
Yeah,
Bye. Thank you
thanks.
guys.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye bye.